Tired of dealing with annoying flies, fruit flies, and gnats in your home? The Zevo Flying Insect Trap is your ultimate solution. Don't wait. Check out the link in the video description now to get your Zevo Flying Insect Trap on Amazon and enjoy a bug-free home today.
Victims of coronavirus were failed by the Scottish and UK governments because they did not properly prepare for the pandemic, a damning public inquiry has concluded. The first report of the UK COVID-19 inquiry condemned Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson's governments for significant flaws in preparing for a series of devastating waves of the disease. Baroness Heather Hallett, who led the inquiry, found a damaging absence of focus on measures needed to deal with a fast-spreading disease, which was to blame for the tragedy of each individual death. More than 235,000 UK deaths were linked with COVID, including 17,000 in Scotland. Baroness Hallett said radical reform is needed so that never again can a disease be allowed to lead to so many deaths and so much suffering. First Minister John Swinney was repeatedly mentioned in her report, as he was the minister in Ms. Sturgeon's cabinet who held responsibility for resilience at the time. The report, which specifically looked at the resilience and preparedness of the UK, concluded the UK and devolved governments had failed their citizens. Scottish Conservative Chairman Craig Hoy said, "This report makes for sobering reading for senior politicians across the United Kingdom, and my thoughts are with bereaved families." From a Scottish perspective, John Swinney has serious questions to answer about his role and why a host of key recommendations to ensure we were prepared for such an event were not delivered by the SNP government. Scottish Labour Health spokesman Jackie Bailey said, "During the pandemic, people across Scotland were let down by two ill-prepared governments and the consequences were catastrophic. The SNP must respond to these damning findings and set out how it will address the serious shortcomings raised." The headline findings and recommendations of the report apply to the UK government and the devolved administrations. This included the finding that there were serious errors on the part of the state and serious flaws in our civil emergency systems. It highlighted that Mr. Swinney held ministerial responsibility for resilience throughout his tenure as Deputy First Minister, from November 2014 until March 2023. It also said Mr. Swinney himself referred to his role as leading the resilience function of the Scottish government. He commissioned a Scottish risk assessment in 2015, which was eventually published in 2018 and largely replicated a UK document with no separate analysis for Scotland that adequately took into account specific factors that might particularly affect the population of Scotland. The report found the devolved administrations simply copied the methods of the UK government on risk assessments, and this did not assess how particular risks would affect the population of the individual nations and failed to take into account sufficiently, or at all, the underlying health, social and economic circumstances of each population. During her appearance at the inquiry, Ms. Sturgeon confirmed that the Scottish government stood down planning for a pandemic in order to instead step up preparations for a no-deal Brexit. The report highlighted that Gillian Russell, Scottish Government Director of Safer Communities, had told the inquiry that some work was paused because priority was given to other things. It said that, by the time the pandemic struck, 8 out of 22 recommendations from Criticises, a cross-government exercise which took place in 2016, were incomplete in Scotland, including refreshing a previous strategy, fit testing of PPE, expanding of social care capacity, and updating pandemic guidance. The inquiry report said, a system that was geared towards acting upon its findings would have done something about this. However, the governments of the UK, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland did not act with sufficient urgency, or at all. As the specific example of Criticises Cygnus underlines, lessons that could and should have been learned were not learned. They were left to be discovered afresh in the next exercise or, as it transpired, when the COVID-19 pandemic struck. It concluded, the inquiry has no hesitation in concluding that the processes, planning and policy of the civil contingency structures within the UK government and devolved administrations and civil services failed their citizens. Baroness Hallett added, there must be radical reform.